The morning sun cast long shadows across the murky waters of the Everglades as Carl Denson secured his tackle box to the aluminum boat. At 50 years old, Carl had been fishing these waters for over 3 decades, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency as he checked his gear one final time. The familiar weight of his lucky fishing hat sat comfortably on his graying head, a hat that had seen countless dawn expeditions just like this one. Carl had always been a solitary fisherman, preferring the quiet communion with nature over the chatter of fishing buddies. His wife Martha had long since stopped asking him to take company on these trips, understanding that these solo ventures were as much about finding peace as they were about catching fish. The divorce papers sitting on his kitchen table back home seemed like a distant concern out here, where the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the boat hull and the occasional cry of a heron. The boat motor coughed to life with a familiar rumble, and Carl guided his vessel deeper into the maze of channels that crisscrossed the wetlands. He knew these waters better than most, having explored every hidden cove and shallow bay over the years. Today felt different, though, charged with an energy he couldn't quite identify. The air was thick with humidity, and storm clouds gathered ominously on the horizon, but Carl had weathered worse conditions. As he navigated through a particularly narrow channel lined with towering cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, Carl noticed the unusual silence. Normally, these waters teemed with life. Birds calling from the canopy, fish jumping, the splash of turtles sliding off logs. Today, an eerie quiet had settled over the swamp like a heavy blanket. Even the insects seemed muted, their usual chorus reduced to an occasional buzz. Carl cut the engine near his favorite fishing spot, a deep pool where the channel widened into a small lagoon. Ancient cypress trees rose from the dark water like cathedral pillars, their massive trunks disappearing into the canopy above. He had pulled countless bass and catfish from these waters, and the spot held a special place in his heart. It was here that he had taught his son Tommy to fish, back when the boy was still interested in spending time with his old man. The memory of Tommy brought a familiar ache to Carl's chest. His son was 25 now, living in Miami and working in tech, a world as foreign to Carl as the surface of Mars. They spoke maybe once a month, brief conversations that felt more like obligations than genuine connection. Carl often wondered if his obsession with fishing had driven a wedge between them, if all those weekends spent on the water had somehow cost him his relationship with his son. Shaking off the melancholy thoughts, Carl baited his hook with a large shiner and cast his line toward a fallen log that jutted from the water like a crooked finger. The bait hit the water with a satisfying plop, sending ripples across the mirror-like surface. He settled back in his seat, rod in hand, and let the familiar rhythm of fishing wash over him. The first hour passed peacefully, with Carl catching and releasing several small bass. The fish seemed sluggish, almost reluctant to take the bait, which struck him as odd. Usually, this spot was productive from the moment he arrived. He switched lures several times, trying everything from topwater plugs to deep-diving crankbaits, but the fish remained uncooperative. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive. Sweat beaded on Carl's forehead and soaked through his fishing shirt. He took a long drink from his water bottle and considered moving to a shadier spot, but something kept him anchored to this location. Call it intuition or stubborn determination, but Carl felt certain that patience would pay off. It was then that he noticed the disturbance in the water near the far bank. At first, he thought it might be a large fish breaking the surface, but the movement was too deliberate, too purposeful. Carl squinted against the glare of the sun on the water, trying to make out what was causing the subtle wake that moved parallel to the shoreline. The wake disappeared, and Carl convinced himself it had been his imagination or perhaps a large turtle. He had seen plenty of both in these waters over the years. But as he prepared to cast again, a chill ran down his spine despite the oppressive heat. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. The water around his boat had taken on an unnatural stillness, as if every creature beneath the surface was holding its breath. Even the gentle current that usually tugged at his anchor line seemed to have stopped. Carl found himself scanning the water more carefully, his experienced eye searching for any sign of movement or disturbance. A sudden splash near the cypress trees made him jump, nearly dropping his rod. A great blue heron took flight, its massive wings beating frantically as it rose from the water with obvious distress. The bird's harsh cry echoed across the lagoon, a sound that seemed to carry more alarm than Carl had ever heard from one of these usually stoic creatures. Carl's unease grew stronger. In all his years of fishing, he had developed an almost supernatural sense for reading the water and the behavior of its inhabitants. Right now, every instinct he possessed was telling him that something was very wrong. The absence of normal wildlife activity, the strange stillness of the water, and now the heron's obvious distress all pointed to the presence of a large predator. He knew that alligators were common in these waters, but most were relatively small and avoided human contact. Carl had encountered plenty of them over the years, usually content to give each other a wide berth. But the disturbance he had witnessed suggested something much larger than the typical 6 or 8-foot gators he was accustomed to seeing. As if summoned by his thoughts, Carl caught sight of movement in his peripheral vision. Turning slowly, he saw what looked like a floating log about 30 yards away, near the base of a massive cypress. But logs didn't have eyes, and logs didn't move with such deliberate purpose. Carl's blood ran cold as he realized he was looking at the largest crocodile he had ever seen. The creature was enormous, easily 15 feet long, and probably weighing close to 1,000 pounds. Its massive head was the size of a small bathtub, and even from this distance, Carl could see the terrible intelligence in its yellow eyes. Unlike the alligators he was familiar with, this was clearly an American crocodile, a species he knew to be more aggressive and territorial than their alligator cousins. The crocodile remained motionless, watching Carl with the patience of a predator that had survived for millions of years. Carl's hands trembled slightly as he slowly reached for his cell phone, hoping to call for help, but the device showed no signal bars. He was completely alone with this prehistoric monster, miles from the nearest help. Carl's mind raced as he tried to remember everything he knew about crocodile behavior. They were ambush predators, capable of explosive bursts of speed both in water and on land. This one was clearly large enough to take down prey much bigger than a 50-year-old fisherman. The smart thing to do would be to start his engine and get out of there as quickly as possible. But as Carl reached for the ignition key, the crocodile began to move. It slid through the water with surprising grace for such a massive creature, its powerful tail propelling it forward with barely a ripple. The predator was positioning itself between Carl and the main channel, cutting off his most direct route of escape. Carl's heart hammered in his chest as he realized the gravity of his situation. This wasn't a chance encounter with a wild animal. This was a calculated hunt. The crocodile had been watching him, studying him, and now it was making its move. Carl had become prey in his own sanctuary, the peaceful waters he had loved for so many years transformed into a deadly trap. The engine turned over on the first try, and Carl immediately threw the boat into reverse, hoping to back away from the approaching predator. But the crocodile was faster than he had anticipated. With a sudden burst of speed that sent water cascading in all directions, the massive reptile closed the distance between them in seconds. Carl spun the wheel hard to port, hoping to swing around the crocodile and make a run for open water. The boat responded sluggishly, weighed down by his gear and hampered by the shallow water near the bank. Behind him, he could hear the sound of the crocodile's powerful tail thrashing against the water as it gave chase. The narrow channel that had seemed so peaceful an hour earlier now felt like a gauntlet. Overhanging branches scraped against the boat's canopy as Carl pushed the throttle to its limit, the small outboard motor screaming at maximum RPM. He could feel the crocodile's presence behind him, could almost sense its massive bulk cutting through the water in pursuit. A glance over his shoulder confirmed his worst fears. The crocodile was gaining on him, its prehistoric form moving through the water with terrifying efficiency. Its jaws were slightly open, revealing rows of teeth that looked like ivory daggers. Carl had read that crocodiles could reach speeds of up to 20 miles per hour in water, and his small fishing boat was no match for such raw power. The channel ahead narrowed even further, forcing Carl to reduce speed to navigate between the cypress trees. It was exactly the opportunity the crocodile had been waiting for. With a surge of power that sent a wall of water washing over the boat's transom, the massive predator closed the final distance. Carl felt the impact before he saw it. The crocodile's massive head struck the boat's hull with the force of a battering ram, sending vibrations through the aluminum structure that Carl felt in his bones. The boat lurched violently to one side, nearly throwing him overboard. His tackle box flew across the deck, spilling lures and hooks in all directions. The crocodile pulled back for another attack, and Carl got his first close look at the creature that was hunting him. Its head was massive beyond belief, easily 3 feet long and armed with teeth that seemed designed specifically for crushing bone. Scars crisscrossed its hide, evidence of countless battles fought and won over what must have been decades of life in these waters. The second impact was even more violent than the first. The crocodile's jaws clamped down on the boat's gunwale, and Carl heard the sickening sound of aluminum being crushed like a tin can. The boat tilted dangerously as the predator's weight threatened to capsize it entirely. Water began pouring in through the damaged hull, and Carl realized with growing horror that his boat was taking on water faster than the bilge pump could handle. Carl grabbed his emergency flare gun from the console, his hands shaking so badly he could barely load the cartridge. The crocodile had released its grip on the boat, but remained close, circling like a shark. Its yellow eyes never left Carl, and he could see the calculation in that ancient gaze. The predator was taking its time now, savoring the hunt. The flare gun fired with a bright red flash, the projectile streaking across the water to explode in a shower of sparks near the crocodile's head. For a moment, Carl thought he had scared it off. The massive reptile submerged, disappearing beneath the dark water, and Carl allowed himself a brief moment of hope. But the hope was short-lived. The crocodile hadn't fled. It had simply changed tactics. Carl realized this with growing terror as he felt something massive bump against the bottom of his boat. The predator was directly beneath him now, using its enormous bulk to lift the small vessel partially out of the water. The boat tilted at a crazy angle as the crocodile surfaced directly underneath it. Carl found himself sliding toward the water as the deck became a ramp leading directly into the creature's waiting jaws. He grabbed desperately for handholds, his fingers finding purchase on the boat's steering wheel just as his feet went into the water. The sensation of the crocodile's hide against his legs was like touching living leather, rough and incredibly powerful. Carl could feel the creature's muscles bunching beneath its skin as it prepared for the final attack. The water around the boat had turned dark with mud stirred up from the bottom, creating an apocalyptic scene that seemed to belong in a nightmare rather than reality. Carl hauled himself back into the boat with strength born of pure desperation, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. The crocodile had submerged again, but Carl knew it was still there, still hunting. The damaged boat was taking on water rapidly now, and he estimated he had maybe 10 minutes before it sank completely. He tried the radio, but it had been damaged in the attack, producing only static and garbled fragments of distant conversations. His cell phone remained useless, showing no signal despite his elevated position. Carl was truly alone with the monster that had marked him for death. The next attack came from a different angle entirely. The crocodile exploded from the water near the bow of the boat, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from Carl's head. The force of its emergence sent a wall of water cascading over the boat, and Carl found himself drenched and temporarily blinded. When his vision cleared, he saw that the crocodile had managed to get its front claws over the bow of the boat. The aluminum hull groaned under the creature's weight as it tried to haul itself aboard. Carl grabbed an oar and began beating at the crocodile's head, but the blows seemed to have no effect on the armored skull. The crocodile's jaws opened wide, revealing a pink throat that looked like a cave entrance. Carl could smell the creature's breath, a mixture of rotting fish and something far more sinister. The rows of teeth were even more terrifying up close, each one perfectly designed for gripping and tearing flesh. Carl jabbed the oar directly into the crocodile's open mouth, hoping to trigger a gag reflex or at least cause enough discomfort to make it release the boat. Instead, the powerful jaws snapped shut on the wooden paddle, splintering it like a matchstick. The crocodile shook its head violently, sending fragments of wood flying in all directions. The boat was sinking faster now, the water level inside rising past Carl's ankles. He could feel the vessel becoming more unstable with each passing moment, and he knew that once it went under, he would be completely at the mercy of the predator that had been stalking him. In desperation, Carl grabbed his tackle box and hurled it at the crocodile's head. The metal container struck the creature's snout with a loud clang, and for a moment, the predator seemed stunned. It released its grip on the boat and slid back into the water, giving Carl a brief respite. But the respite was only temporary. The crocodile surfaced again almost immediately, this time approaching from the port side. Carl could see that the creature had learned from each attack, adapting its strategy based on his responses. This was no mindless beast. It was an intelligent predator with decades of hunting experience. The boat lurched violently as the crocodile struck again, this time managing to get its massive head over the gunwale. Carl found himself face to face with the creature, close enough to see his own reflection in its cold yellow eyes. The crocodile's breath was hot against his face, and he could see every detail of its terrible teeth. Time seemed to slow as Carl stared into the face of his own death. The crocodile's jaws began to open, and Carl knew that this was the moment he had been dreading. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. The boat was sinking beneath him, and the most efficient predator on Earth was about to claim its prize. Carl thought of Martha, of the divorce papers waiting on his kitchen table, of all the words left unsaid between them. He thought of Tommy, of fishing trips that would never happen, of a relationship that might have been repaired if only he had tried harder. He thought of all the sunrises he would never see, all the fish he would never catch, all the quiet moments on the water that had given his life meaning. The crocodile's jaws closed around Carl's torso with a pressure that defied comprehension. He felt his ribs crack under the incredible force, felt his breath being crushed from his lungs. The pain was beyond description, beyond human experience. It was the pain of being consumed by something far older and more powerful than civilization itself. Carl's last coherent thought was not of fear or pain, but of wonder. Even as the crocodile began its death roll, spinning in the water with Carl trapped in its jaws, he marveled at the raw power of the creature that had claimed him. This was nature in its purest form, predator and prey locked in the eternal dance that had played out for millions of years before humans ever walked the earth. The dark waters of the Everglades closed over them both, predator and prey disappearing beneath the surface in a swirl of bubbles and blood. The damaged boat continued to sink, carrying with it the remnants of a life spent in pursuit of peace on the water. Carl's lucky fishing hat floated on the surface for a few moments before it too was pulled under by the current. The lagoon gradually returned to its previous stillness, as if nothing had happened. The cypress trees stood silent witness to the drama that had unfolded, their ancient trunks having seen countless such encounters over the centuries. A great blue heron landed on a nearby branch, eyeing the disturbed water with the patient wisdom of a creature that understood the true nature of the wild. In the depths below, the crocodile had already begun to retreat to its lair, its hunger satisfied for now. Carl Denson had become part of the eternal cycle of the Everglades, his final moments a testament to the raw power of nature and the thin line between civilization and the wild. The waters that had given him so much peace had ultimately claimed him, completing a circle that began the moment he first cast a line into their depths. The storm clouds that had been gathering all morning finally opened, sending sheets of rain across the water. The sound of the rain hitting the surface was like applause, nature's acknowledgement of another successful hunt in the endless theater of survival. By evening, there would be no trace of what had happened, no evidence of the struggle that had taken place in this remote corner of the wilderness. Carl's truck would be found in the boat launch parking area 3 days later, leading to a search that would turn up nothing but a few pieces of debris from his boat. The official report would list him as missing and presumed drowned, another tragic reminder of the dangers inherent in venturing alone into wild places. But those who knew the Everglades understood the truth. Carl had not simply drowned, but had been claimed by something far more ancient and terrible than mere water. The crocodile would live on, growing even larger and more formidable with each passing year. It would claim other victims in time, other souls who ventured too far into its domain. But Carl Denson would always hold a special place in the creature's memory, the fisherman who had provided such excellent sport on that humid morning when the storm clouds gathered and the waters grew still.